Hello, good morning, everyone. I am late. I am so sorry. Today was fine generally, except for the fact that apparently my internet decided that it's Monday, and it was absolutely on its best behavior on Thursday when it had company. And now that there's no company and it's just me, my internet was like, well, screw you, it's Monday and I don't feel like working. So I've been wrestling with it all day long, shall we say, which also means that right now I am on my phone using data, and hopefully there's not a serious issue in connection. However, if I if I randomly disappear, that's what happens. So, hello and welcome to Monday, May 11th. I am Gillian, and this is a community coffee for CosmoQuest. Um, we are talking about art and space. So, I have started this new series, which is now going to be every Monday, talking about the crossovers between art and space. Now, the one thing that is kind of interesting about the fact that my internet crashed right before the stream started was that I don't really have the chat working. So at some point, I'm gonna deal with that so I can see your comments and deal with that. But happy Monday. Welcome to Monday. I've been living through Monday for several hours already, and I can tell you that it's okay. There have been some moments of scatterbrainness where I just had to quit and clean the floor, which is a thing that happens. So let's talk about art, because that's something that I adore. And well, there's so much crossover between space and art, and this series is all about investigating that crossover. Now, on Thursday, I think I got some wonderful comments, and thank you so much for them. But I think what it did is set the expectations a little high. So today, instead of having a charismatic guest with a super awesome show and tell, it's just me, Jillian, geeking out about finding art in unexpected places. Basically, one of the first things that I started thinking about when I wanted to do this series on the crossover between space and art was the art that you find in art about space, right? Now, because when I was first starting to think about this, I thought most of the space art that I can think of off the top of my head, such as sci-fi films and books. That's the easiest thing I can think of. There's not a lot of art in it, right? Like the aesthetic of space and sci-fi tends to be very aesthetic, if don't mind me using a fancy word. It's very sterile. It's very white and silver. It's not very colorful. There's not a lot of art involved. There are space battles. There are spaceships, which are also silver on the outside and the inside. A lot of wires hanging around, but there's just not a lot of paintings in space and painters and choreographers and all this kind of thing. So off the top of my head, I was just like, wait a minute, we're making all this art about space, but we're not actually talking about art. What is that about? Now, I would like to say that at the start, I decided to approach this in a very scientific manner. But I didn't. And then I thought later that, hey, I should have approached this in a scientific manner. And that would have been smart and interesting. But basically, I had this hypothesis, which was there is a lack of art in art about space. And so I set off to test the hypothesis. And I had some wonderful suggestions from you guys in the Discord, which I didn't have time to Ooh, sorry, that was a large finger coming at you. I didn't. I'll. Yeah. So I lost my train of thought. Coming back to basically, so I decided that I didn't have time to listen to all of your wonderful suggestions because, in my defense, Thursday was not all that long ago. I decided instead to just do what I know and I've seen recently. And then if we decide to continue this series, then maybe I can talk about and have time to read all the amazing books that people would suggest. So I basically have four things. There's three films and there's one book, and I've seen them recently or I know them well, so that I can act like I know what I'm talking about. And I found along the way, when I was thinking this through over the weekend, that actually there's a lot more art around than I thought there was. So, for example, one of the first space films that I thought about was the film that I've seen recently, which was The Martian. And I thought, well, it's not very, it's, yes, we can start. I have someone talking in my ear, and I'm totally, there's internet for the fail on Monday. Anyway, so I was watching The Martian, and I thought, you know what? There's no art in this. The hub that they live in is pretty, um, pretty white and nothing. There's really nothing going on. Yes, of course, it's a beautiful movie. There's some great shots of all this kind of stuff. The filmmaking is wonderful. There's a soundtrack, all this kind of thing, but there's no art. I had to stop myself when I realized that there is, and it plays a huge role in the film itself, and it's disco music, right? There is this incredible, and it plays such a huge role that it's referred to in 4 or 5 different places, and the disco music is an integral part of building the relationship between Mark Watney and the commander, right? And that builds itself up to their reunion when the commander pulls him in and they meet in space, right? And I think, if I remember correctly, at that point, he actually says something about your taste in music sucks. So I found a graphic that has this quote. So tell Commander Lula disco stops. But it's this music that's kind of always there in the background, and he's responding to it. It gives things kind of a hopeful and exciting and fun sort of feeling, when people are feeling down about the fact that there's this dude stranded on Mars, and nobody really thought that they were going to finish the film with him there, but still, like, it really pulls up your spirits, right? And it's a big part of kind of, but it's there in the background. It's like hiding in plain sight. Like, I missed it, right? When I was first thinking about it, it didn't occur to me, and so it's like there, but completely, in plain sight, but just so woven into it that you miss it. And that's also the case, actually, with the next movie that I want to talk about, which is the next movie which I want to talk about, which is WALL-E. I was watching this recently, and it's just the most delightful, wonderful, adorable little movie. And again, when I first thought about it, I was like, there's not a lot of art in WALL-E. Like, the spaceship where the humans live is, so it's so dry. There's all that you see in this spaceship is advertisements. And not only that, but all of the people are wearing the same thing. There's not even fashion. People are not hanging out making paintings. They're sitting on these giant chairs, talking to each other, and all around them are these advertisements. That's not very artful. Like, this is great. Humanity's future in space is this. Right. Then I had to stop and go back and think, wait a minute. Wally himself itself is very much an artist, actually. When you think about where he lives, and I think I have a picture of where he lives, his little bunker thing, and which is basically a museum, right? It's a museum, it's an art museum. And when you come into it, he's got lights hanging all these over the places, and like, it's such a cozy, artistic little cave that this little robot has built for itself. And also, this robot is like, just so attracted by beauty and interesting things, and that very much is an artistic spirit, right? And not only that, in Wally, you have this incredibly important connection with this old movie, which is the movie that he's watching of the people dancing, right? And it's and the people, the two lovers meeting each other and their hands meeting, and that's when he puts his little, things together, and and learns about love through, holding, hold that movie, and that's why he's inspired to, you know keep trying to hold Eve's hand and all this kind of thing. So this is an interesting note that actually that movie is a real movie. It's Hello Dolly, which was originally a 1964 musical and was later turned into a film in 1969, and it was nominated for a Best Picture. And while I was reading the Wikipedia, I went down a rabbit hole of what's this, what's that, what's that. I was reading the Wikipedia about Hello Dolly, and I realized that I have actually seen it. I've watched it at some point, and it's delightful and ridiculous, and there's all kinds of mistaken identities and people pretending to be people and hiding in closets and spying on other people. It's just fantabulously, slapstick Broadway. It's wonderful. Anyway, so Hello Dolly is the film kind of running in the background, and it's apparently the reason the director actually made the film. He was watching this Put On Your Sunday Clothes, and like, I gotta make a film about a robot who saves humanity, which that's how the artistic brain works, people. Just one thing leads to another. So not only though, like, he's inspired, the Wally is kind of inspired by this, but he uses this this kind of thing of the dancing, the people dancing. This comes back up in very significant ways later in the movie, right? I think probably, one of the most delightful moments is when the captain starts to think about returning to Earth, and he just goes through this, define this, define that, define dancing. It's like humanity has forgotten how to dance, and it's connecting them back with the Earth, which is an interesting thing. It's like art is a thing that belongs on Earth, right? Like, these humans are out in space and they have nothing to do with art, but this art, this idea of dancing, calls them back to Earth, to relearn their humanity and their dancing skills, apparently, which is just super awesome. So I think that, again, it took just a little bit of thinking to realize, like, how important the art was to this film. Now, the next one is something that requires a little bit more detective work, or at least watching something that's not actually the point of what's happening on screen. But it's actually something that immediately came up into my mind when I was thinking about this topic. and that is Star Wars Episode 3, when uh, when Emperor Palpatine is trying to convince Anakin to come over the dark side, and he tells him the whole story about Darth Plagueis the Wise, and what happened, and that the iconic line of the dark side is the pathway to many abilities, some consider to be unnatural, is it's a very, very pivotal scene. But more interestingly than the scene itself is the fact that it happened in Palpatine's private box in an alien ballet. So when Anakin comes in, the start of the scene, he's running up the steps to the Senate, and you can see all of these alien senators dressed up for a night at the ballet or the opera. I haven't quite figured out if it's supposed to be an opera or ballet. But anyway, and he comes, it's not a ballet or an opera really in any sense of the word that we would think about it, right? It's these big bubbles that are kind of floating around with these, ribbons that are flying inside, and this, it sounds like a didgeridoo, I think, the broad, sort of like deep, you know, sort of sound that's in the background. And you can, over the course of, what's wonderful is over the course of this conversation, you hear people in the background, clapping and being like, oh yes, this is a lovely show that we're watching. And all the time, it's just happening where this, intense, pivotal conversation is happening in the private box of the emperor, which I just think is really interesting, and it's very cool, and it's just cool that somebody in the art department was like, you know what, I think that senators would just occasionally have a night out at the opera and the ballet, and decided to put that in, and I just think that's brilliant. Now, the last sort of thing, and then I'm going to fight with my internet for a second to get the chat back up so I can actually see if there are questions and chat with you guys. But the last thing that I want to talk about is actually a book, and I read it recently, and it was a great book first and foremost, and there's actually two of them. It's called Stars Uncharted, and then the sequel is Stars Beyond. And I think that there's going to be a third one at some point, which I'm waiting for. And it's written by S.K. Dunstall. Let me just check that name. It's definitely S.K. Dunstall, huh? And it's it's two Australian sisters, basically, who are, they have this pseudonym that they write under. And they write what is known as space operas, right? Space operas, that's brilliant, right? And I think the idea of a space opera is just, is fascinating. So in this book, it's a whole lot of space battles, right? It's a whole lot of space battles. It's a lot of big, mean corporations that get away with things that they're not supposed to get away from, and all this kind of stuff. And honestly, when I was thinking about it, I was like, there's definitely not art in this. I should definitely not say that anymore. It's like the dude in Princess Bride who keeps saying, inconceivable, when obviously it's happening. Anywho, what's interesting, the art is not obvious. It's not a painter, it's not a dancer, it's not any art that we might think of, but basically in this universe that these sisters have created, there's what is called body modders, right? They're people who modify bodies, right? They can, depending on how skilled the modder is, they can, basically like change your body into really anything. And they are referred to more than once as airy fairy artist type. which I think is kind of interesting. That not only are they kind of seen as not good to, not good to be in the battles, which they are, but they're kind of like the airy fairy artists. They're not really the space faring, the space pirates. They're just, anyway. So, and actually, what's interesting about the body modders is that they they play a huge role in the plot. Basically, the main character is this old explorer who's been, body modified, genetically modified to stay young, and the characteristic modifications in his genetics basically, gives away the secret eventually. And the body model who's discovered them is like, this person that made these modifications was a craftsman. Like she said, I thought he was just a technician, but it turns out he's a craftsman. By the way, my chat is working again. So I've missed all of the questions, but I've seen the thing start to go, and I'm sorry, I'm hitting my mic. I get excited. So I will try not to do that. So it's just interesting that these airy fairy artist types are a huge part of the plot, and that there's that sort of quiet philosophical debate on technicians versus craftsmen, which is something that artists definitely also get fight about a little bit. So I am seeing that you guys have all these suggestions. This show has art, this book has art, this film has art, which is awesome. And I'm glad that my original hypothesis seems to be proven wrong. So there's Paranor has suggested that he read the questions out to me because I've missed them in the chat, and I think that's a great idea. If that's possible.
Is indeed, Gillian. I am also broadcasting out my mic so they hear the question as well. Earlier, Larry Weird and Proud asked, Gillian, are you going to apply to the Dear Moon project?
I don't know what the Dear Moon project is, actually.
Well, that's something we will have to look up. I believe it's part of, if I remember correctly, it's part of the Sending Artists to the Moon.
Oh.
I can't remember who was doing it. I know somebody was going to pay for it. But yeah, that's the noise you're hearing is actually an affect of the internet at Gillian's place right at the moment. So apologies, everyone, for the little static.
Well, on Thursday. So, okay. Were there any other questions?
Larry just
I just
the
saw
link
that.
for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the sound of the steady signal you get broadcast.
Josh Guido, go make your dinner.
I will be the first to jump, to find the alien artist and be like, hey, let's collaborate on something. But yeah, you guys are very patient with my.
I'm not seeing any other questions. There was some discussion about enterprise DNG, especially with art and using art with plotline. Veronica Cure is asking, have you thought much of what we see as space images are actually artist creation?
Yes, I have, and that was actually something that I wanted to make an episode of the show on, which was when did that begin and how did it begin? And because it's true that so much of the um, yeah, so much. And really, I think every picture we see now is an artist's recreation or an artist's interpretation. Yeah, and I would love to investigate that. I would love to investigate that. Do you know it? Would it help? I'm sorry to do this, but I think if I turn the fan off, it might. Is that make it? That would make it. So I actually just, what I'll do is I'll just wrap up. Uh, but Larry is asking if I've read Starman, which I haven't, but I marked it on Goodreads as something that I want to read. I wasn't able to find an ebook of it, and I don't think I can get things delivered here. So there's a project called Moonbound, a radio telescope to create art. Um, I feel like I have heard that before. So yeah, I'm just gonna wrap up because apparently the audio is really bad. So just Mondays, technology, very far away, all kinds of thank you for the patience. Thank you here. Thank you for joining us for community coffee. Hey, you can also do community coffee. If I can do it, so can you. Get in touch, join us on the Discord, and come up with your ideas as part of this community program. So, again, thank you for being here with me. Again, I'm so sorry about the internet. I don't know how to deal with it. And have a good Monday. This week at CosmoQuest, for various reasons, we're doing some cleanup. So we're going to have Give Insights on Tuesday and Thursday only, and the rest of the days are going to be off. And figure out clean up and catch up and all this stuff. So you will have sort of calm week, but don't worry, everything will be back as normal. Thank you again, and